I'm Amelia.
And I'm Kate, and welcome to the Away Cafe vlog. Our guest today is Darren Parry, who is chief of the Northwestern Band Shoshone. And Darren is going to show us how to make something that his ancestors have been making for generations, hundreds of years.
If not thousands. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Darren, tell us a little bit about who taught you how to make this recipe.
Well, the wonderful thing about what we have here is I talk a lot about my grandmother, the importance of her. She was our tribal historian. She introduced this to me and gave me background with it. I mean, the ingredients we have here are so important to the Shoshone people that they had ceremonies. They had chokecherry dances that honored the chokecherry. And so what you have here is probably thousands of years old and something that our people really relied on to sustain them through the winter. This wasn't a treat. This was what they needed to eat to survive.
And your grandmother's name was May Timbimbu Parry.
She was an incredible woman, so very lucky.
And so what do you call the dish?
It's called Pemmican. That term, though, is an Ojibwe Cree term. It's their words, and it means fat. So when you think about fat, most of us try to avoid it. We need it in our diet. But to the people that lived on the land, fat, especially in the winter months, was really important. So what the buffalo was to the tribes of the Great Plains, the pine nut was to the tribes of the Great Basin. That's how important it was. The most important thing was water, but after that it was the pinyon pines and the role it played in just sustaining them through those long, cold winters. We were hunters and gatherers, which means we traveled with the seasons. And so when the pine nuts were about ready to harvest, we'd go to the western part of Utah and a little bit into Nevada, where the pinyon pines are located, and that's where we would harvest those. And we would harvest those in a great number, enough so that they would sustain us until February, March, when we could begin that cycle of hunting and gathering again. But that little powerful white seed was instrumental in getting those Shoshones through the winter.
And labor intensive. You have to get them
Very.
out of the bush, and then you have to shell each one.
Very labor intensive. You couldn't pick them after they fell off the tree. You had to almost get them when they were still closed up a little bit, and they had sticks with forks on them that the men would pull them down. They would throw the whole pine cone into a fire and roast the whole thing. What that did is it started to open up that pine nut. And then you could get the brown shell. And then once you got the brown shell out, then you had to roast them again. So it was quite a process, very labor intensive. Now I know why they're so expensive in the grocery store today. Yeah. But something that was vital, even more so than the meat and other things that they needed.
So can you tell us more about the ingredients we have in front of us?
Yes, let's start here. Today I brought buffalo, bison jerky. That would have been a major part of what the Shoshones had, but they were pretty much wiped out in the Utah Territory after 1835. Mm-hmm. So they would have utilized deer, elk, moose, any other kind of protein meat that they could have gotten. That hunter-gatherer lifestyle, that was the hunting. And for the most part, they would eat the meat fresh, but 90% of it they would dry and use for later months in the winter. Then you have your pine nuts that they would harvest always in the fall. And then the chokecherry. Now, I live in the Cache Valley. I live up by Logan, and there's probably 5 berries that are indigenous to the Cache National Forest. Chokecherries being one, but the chokecherries are so much more prevalent than the other berries the chokecherry became very important to the Shoshones because they could gather them in a large quantity and dry them and then use them for a variety of things, including medicines. So
And they dried them in the sun?
they dried them in the sun.
Okay.
They'd get rid of the seeds because the seeds are poison.
Oh,
Well, they can be poisonous over a long period of time if you're not careful. So they would remove the seeds and then crack them open and then dry them in the sun to be used for later. So,
okay. Should we get started?
yes, this is so cool. My grandkids love this. 3 simple ingredients, but 3 ingredients that really saved the Shoshones from starvation all winter long. And so go ahead and take some, just a couple of pieces of the buffalo bison meat. And what you want to do is you want to just pick it apart and make it into smaller pieces before you use the stone.
Like about this size?
Yeah, yeah.
So just on the counter?
Just on the grinding stone. Just
Okay.
put little pieces of that meat.
Darren, this is Amy Broom on the stone. You want to tell us about that?
Well, she was my great-grandmother, Amy Huchu Timbimbu's mother. And so that grinding stone's been passed down for many generations. And
You
yeah,
were lucky enough to
I'm
get
lucky
it.
enough to get it. My siblings say I get everything. So, but the reason we do this is because if you think about it, if you try to just use the stone and grind up a big chunk of meat, it's just not as easy. So we're just making it a little simpler to.
And how is this size? How are we doing here? Is
Good,
it too big?
good. Nope, that's perfect.
Okay.
And you don't want to get too much. You've got about enough there. And I'll tell you why in a minute. I tried making a bigger batch of it, and the more meat you get on there, just the tougher it is, the longer you spend just grinding it to almost a paste.
Oh.
That's the kind of where you want to get it.
And do you usually make about one of these at a time? Is that?
Yeah, I'll make them one at a time, which means it was pretty labor intensive. But think about this. Shoshones are storytellers. The winter time is the elders' time. What that means is the elders got to sit down with the children and tell them stories and share with them a part of their culture that conveyed something meaningful that was important to them to know. And so I can imagine just sitting in a teepee or another lodge with the women and the children with grinding stones sitting around and making these all day and sharing stories and talking about the events of the day. So,
Do you think the children and the men helped with this, or would it just have been the women?
I'm sure the children would have helped a little bit as they became of age. The man, not so much probably.
They did the hunting.
They weren't very good for much of anything. The men hunted and they went to war. But even when the men killed a bison, the women would come and take care of it.
Skin it and everything.
But we're a matriarchal society. The women were always the most important people within the tribe. So it made sense that, they pretty much did everything. Well, it looks like if we've got our pieces kind of broken up into smaller pieces, which will make it easier to work with. Now, take your stone, and there's no method to this madness. What you're going to do is just start rubbing that meat into the stone. You don't want to pound it because that would leave little pieces of rock embedded, but just start going back and forth and almost trying to make those pieces into a paste almost. And so I found a smaller amount is so much easier than trying to do a bigger amount. Even though when we get done, you'll wish we would have made it bigger, but it's just, yeah, and they were just slow and deliberate, and I can imagine them talking about their day and their husbands and everything else.
Is this something they would have made a whole bunch in the fall?
Yes, they would have started
okay.
making these as soon as they had the berries that were dry.
Oh, okay.
So they would have had the meat pretty much, but then they still needed the pine nuts, which the Shoshone word for pine nut is duva.
Does that look like enough?
So, yes.
Okay.
So, just kind of congregate it into a little pile. It doesn't have to be a big pile. And now add a few nuts into there. Now, yeah.
Is that too many?
Nope, that's about right.
Okay.
And you'll have just a few less because of, yep, that's perfect, because of the amount.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now just start doing the same thing with the nuts. And then the nuts and the meat are going to start incorporating into themselves. So,
This is very therapeutic, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Why.
Not if I had to make 100 of them. But
yeah. Well, if your life depended on it, maybe you'd be a little more motivated. So that looks really good. We've ground up the pine nuts and the bison jerky. Now we're ready to add the choke cherries, the dried choke cherries to our mixture. And you do it about the same way you do the number of berries you put in, maybe 6 or 7 for you, maybe 5 berries of those that would go in yours. Otherwise, yeah, just throw them on there. And if you need to add more later, I'd put a couple more for you.
Okay.
Okay.
And then we do the same thing?
I'll get a few more on there. Here, let's do this. There you go.
And then smash again?
Yep, start smashing again. Do the same. It's the same process with all 3 ingredients. Now you have dried the choke cherries. You would think they would grind up the easiest, but when I make it, it seems they grind up the worst. It just takes a little more muscle for that dried cherry to be
The nuts were nice.
incorporated.
They just crunched and smashed right in.
Yeah.
And Darren, you and your cousin Patty Timberman,
Uh-huh.
you show people how to do this, right?
We
In
do.
different communities.
Patty will hold classes. We try to, one thing about joining the LDS Church in 1873, we didn't get moved to a reservation. So that's the wonderful thing.
Yeah.
The downside of that, though, is we lose our culture and we lose our language much quicker than a tribe that lived together would. And so one thing Patty has tried to do is offer classes every Saturday to our youth that will allow us to teach them life skills, teach the culture, teach them language, and teach them classes like this. So I have a lot of people ask, well, can we go? Can we go? And absolutely. And with the Interpretive Center we're going to build at the Bear River Massacre site, we're going to have a learning space that will allow us to teach large classes to people that would like to be involved and learn the culture.
So the classes will move there once the... And when do you break ground?
Probably early summer. That's the plan. And so, what a blessing it's been. 2 years ago, we were able to raise enough money to purchase 700 acres of that sacred land. And now we're going to be able to tell our story with a beautiful building.
And you're still raising money for
Money.
the completion of the
We
building,
are.
right?
We are.
We
I'm
can
not
put
quite.
a
Not
link
quite
in
there
the
yet.
comments
Yeah.
if anybody wants to help out.
Boogai.org. Boogai means big river. We never called the Bear River. And so it was always Boogai, which means big river to us. So that looks really good. I mean,
Yeah, it's getting sticky.
yes, that's what we want. So kind of clean off your stone. Take your hand and just scrape it all into a pile. And what I like to do from here is I will get it all as much as I can off the grinding stone and make a ball. Just press it together with your hand and make a ball.
And this is the grinding stone.
Yes.
And this is what?
Well, I call it all the grinding stone.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that is called. Forever, when the women would die, that would be their gravestone marker.
Oh,
So
wow.
we had an old tribal, she was Chief Sagwich's third wife, Soquitch, and she passed away by Manaway. in between Logan and Brigham City. And they buried her on the top of a knoll on this little hill. And her grinding stone was there till about 1992. And then somebody took it. So, but it marked her grave. We know where her grave is at, but. So once you've got a ball, I would just compress it and make it, and then you can just start making it flat, almost like you would a cookie. And just make it into a small flat cookie, form it so it's round. And then not really thick, because what they would do was they would set those out to dry in the sun. Mm-hmm. And then they would stay good for as long as they needed them to.
So much better than hardtack, the other thing
Yes,
this makes me think
yes.
of. It blows my mind to think of cooking every day with the same thing that is going to be my
Yeah.
grave marker.
I know,
That's
right?
really
I mean,
powerful.
think about that.
Yeah.
It was something that they would, I mean, that tool that you have right there was the most important thing in their life. I mean, think about it. They didn't get up every day to think, oh, what am I going to do today? They got up every day and said, in order for us to survive, we have to, all of us, go out and work hard. My grandmother would say they would pick seeds and berries all day to maybe have enough food for one meal for their family. So if you think about that, and it just, is really humbling to me, how much we have in today's world, but how they lived long ago, how they honored the land, that they never over-harvested any one thing, and they always made sure there was something there for people that came after. Mm-hmm. And so now you've got this finished product, and you're holding it in your hand. Yeah. What's ironic to me, though, and as I think about that, I can almost picture our people 200 years ago holding the same thing. Having that, it's the same ingredients, holding the same thing, that once they dried those, now when I make them, I hurry and eat them because I love them. It's like the kid that gets fresh cookies out of the oven. Uh-huh. You never have any left. But they would set those out in the sun to dry. And in a day, they'd be dried solid. They could then pack them away and then start the whole process over again.
And they didn't have tin foil.
No, they didn't, or parchment paper or anything else. So
tell us more about the community center and the work that's going on there.
a few years ago, being a tribe with no reservation land is such an important thing to Native Americans. So not having land that we could call our own was always a problem. And a couple of years ago, we were able to raise $2 million and purchase 700 acres of that sacred site, where 400 Shoshone men, women, and children were massacred. None of those people were buried. It was January 29th. The ground was frozen in the Cache Valley. And so those bones were left there to rot. And so the fact that we were able to buy that and get it back, we were able to protect them from development and any other thing. Their bones are just beneath the surface. And so after we purchased enough money to buy all of the property, my goal was, let's build an interpretive center on the site. Mm-hmm. Not a visitor center. It needs to be something, I wanted to be a place of learning that people could go to, learn about the history, learn about a part of history that they never got in school. And so from the perspective of the people that were there, the Shoshone people. And so we have a wonderful architect firm here in Salt Lake that did all of the design work for us pro bono. And with that, I was able to go out and start raising money, and I'm a little more than halfway there. But this interpretive center will house learning spaces. That we will be able to teach classes like this to not only our kids, who we really need to teach, but to the community. How many people do you think from southern Idaho and northern Utah would come if we offered a class like this to come take part in it? And so, and it's just something that we want to give back. The community's been so good to us up there, and it just is a really humbling thing to know that we need to what my grandmother taught me, it's important that I pass along to my children, and my children can make these, and their children can make those, and so that part of our history will never be forgotten. I always say their voices speak to us from the dust, and it's true. And it speaks to us in this form. And what can we pass on to the next generation of our people that will honor them and honor how they lived and what they did and some of the hardships they went through. So.
Darren, thank you. This
Oh.
has really been
What a
moving.
blessing to me. This is such a cool thing for me too. I love sharing our culture, and I usually don't get to share the food, but this is really amazing. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Culture without food isn't really culture.
I know, I know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And remember,
Amelia, do you want to put this